So the next speaker, Professor Joseph Ogbonnaya, will take us through constructive theology in world Christianity. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll give you the 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, Simon started us off in a good way on the Council of Nicaea. I'm going to take a different approach. And my own approach is actually about, first of all, what gave rise to Nicaea. I'm not going to dwell so much on this. I presume we know what gave rise to Nicaea, North African Church, and then Thalia is the major work, surviving extant writing of Arius. And good. My work will actually be dependent on a conversation with R.C.P. Hansen, and then a group of African theologians, and then I will wrap up with Bernard Lonergan. Okay. So the impression often created is that the church already had a position, and everybody knows this particular teaching of the church, and then all of a sudden Arius came. Hansen is saying no. Hansen said that it does not, at that particular stage in the history of the church, even though there appears to be a particular common view, you don't have a defined position. So the impression often created, Hansen wants us to correct. And Arius was actually struggling with one thing. And not just Arius, everybody was intent on preserving Christian monotheism. And Christian monotheism in the early church, what really became problematic was the person of Jesus, the divinity of Jesus. And then you now have the issue of, can you be talking about divinity of somebody who had a beginning in the sense of a particular time when he was born and all that. So that upset the original belief about monotheism. And if we look into Abrahamic religion, we also see that the same tension is continuing. But this was the major thing Arius was struggling with. And it was not just Arius. So many people in the early life of the church, important fathers of the church, equally struggled with it, including Eusebius of Caesarea. So many of them were struggling with it. And that particular struggle has not even stopped, despite the definitions of the council. But the major issue was saying that Jesus is a creature. And then further complexifications of the issue by then led to different understandings of logos. So even ordinarily we make use of the Gospel of John, the prologue of John, as a backup to explain the divinity and humanity of Jesus Christ. But at that particular time also, when they read these Gospels, which were in scrolls, still gradually be put together by then, what normally we see is that they have a different interpretation of the Logos. Okay. And some philosophical influences. What actually influenced Arius? You have Aristotle's categories, and the same is being substance accident, as I would eventually say later on. This continues to play itself out as the doctrine develops. By the way, I just want us to bear in mind that the final decision, most viewpoints from Hansen and even Lonergan himself is saying that we have to look at this from the point of view of development of doctrine. And these things gradually evolve. And then the second influence is Medo-Platonism. Medo-Platonism. I selected this book because this is the book that would explain what we mean by Medo-Platonism. And it is dyad, monarch. The monad is unoriginated, but the dyad is originated, having not existed before it came into being. So that title was used in reference to the Son. What is emphasized is the inferiority and imperfection of the Logos, the inferiority of the Son to the Father, evident in the corruptibility of the body and its susceptibility to death. So Jesus Christ is accepted as eternal, but the eternity had a beginning, according to this particular Medo-Platonism. And so when we talk of Logos, therefore, the issue is it of the same substance? You see, that influence of Aristotle still continuing. And then the other influence is allegorical method. I found this on the web, and I think it really explains what a method of interpreting the scripture, the inner spiritual meaning. Most of the fathers of the church interpreted the Old Testament in the light of Christ. That is allegorical interpretation. R.P.C. Hansen's Allegory and Event actually gave a very good explanation of the use of allegory, especially by Origen and the fathers of the church. At times they help, at times they also became problematic. And so the one that is often used on this is Proverbs 8:22. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts long ago. So Arius and most of the early Christians or theologians, if we are going to use that word, often go back to Proverbs 8:22. And then allegorically, they say that it is interpreting, it is saying something about Jesus. And if it is saying something about Jesus, then he is subordinate. So subordinationism often relies on Proverbs 8:22. And so many other texts, I simply isolated Proverbs 8:22. And then Council of Nicaea, little rebuttal to Simon. Yes, there is the general perception that Council of Nicaea was an imperial council because of the presence, the person of Constantine. But going back to the context, Constantine was the only person who had the power to call together such a council at that time. No other person had it. But if we look at Nicaea with the modern contemporary eye, with the present structure of the church, the impression often created is that the Pope should have convoked the council. There are also different viewpoints, but Hansen is clear that such a meeting of bishops was to happen, but Constantine, remembering how he did not handle the issue, the other issue of in the early church prior to Augustine, the issue of thank you very much. The issue of Donatis. So he insisted on being present. Okay. So here's the response of Nicaea to Arius. Again, I am drawing heavily from R.N.C. Hansen. Why am I talking of Hansen? Hansen was, because he's dead, was a very prominent church historian and an Episcopalian priest. And his work is really reliable in this subject matter. And so his Nicaea Creed was a response to Arius. It destroyed the substance of Arian teaching that emphasized the Son to be a creature from God, created out of non-existent, alien to God's substance, hence an inferior to God, not fully human, whose divinity is necessitated by the fact of a suffering God. Hence, the incarnation is God assuming human nature. So this is what Nicaea did, was simply to collapse, to say that Arius and all those who hold such view based on subordinating the Son to the Father is not, that they got it wrong. Then the key word homoousios, I will eventually show that this non-scriptural terminology, why it was systematic in the sense of going beyond the use of the scriptural text, eventually became problematic, because prior to Nicaea, homoousios was used and Arius hated it, because what it does is to equate the Son with the Father. And so the semantic confusion, the homoousios was able to give Nicaea the word they were looking for, that they felt may be a middle ground, but it gave rise to lots of confusion. So, on the use of hypostasis, meaning distinct reality, and ousia, meaning nature or even substance at the period. Also questionable was whether there are 2 or 3 ousia, and on whether the Son is from another hypostasis or ousia than the Father. Confusion equally lurked as to whether hypostasis and ousia meant the same thing. What is interesting and worthy of note is that Nicaea used them interchangeably. But later developments in theology would clarify the maturity of Trinitarian doctrine and the use of these words. If you are looking for a text that is able to try to clarify this in the history and the development of the councils, I will recommend Lonergan's Method in Theology. Don't be intimidated by Lonergan. Just go to the section on doctrines. It is so down to earth. It gives you the gradual development of this particular issue. So, functional specialty doctrines does it very, very well. The other thing it does is what I said before. It emphasizes that we have to look at this from the point of view of, I just looked at the time, development of doctrine. So these are important Hansen's books, The Search for Christian Doctrine of God. This is Allegory and Event. So this is the book that is really influencing me, because he's able to tell you the story, the history, the conflict, the dialectics, and is able to integrate it together again. So the failure of the council is again on the use of homoousios and the semantic confusion it all created. Okay, so why am I making this jump? I'm making the jump because early on in my early on as a young priest in Nigeria, always I take it upon myself to prepare people, especially those who are converting, adults, elderly people from traditional religion to Christianity. And once it comes to the idea of Christian idea of God, you talk of God in 3 persons. They say yes, they agree. It means that there is not much difference between our own and Christianity. But then, as we saw yesterday from the questions, you have to ask yourself, these different issues, how do they relate? So, and we have also looked at the issue of monotheism and polytheism. We have trashed that. I'm not going to go into that because we have seen that African traditional religion primarily is monotheistic, even though you have divinities, even though you have ancestors. So there is immanent within African thought monotheism. Some people may say no, but we all do know that most Africans believe in God. And these are the three people. This is Lamine Sané, this is Sané, and I did not see a good picture of Itowu. I did not want to select the wrong picture. So I decided to use Olodumare, God in Yoruba belief. If you have a copy of this book, I can borrow, please. I'm seriously looking into it. Because we need to relate, for me, I think that we need to relate what is the relation between God and the divinities in African religion. So what role do they play? And then this is Muzorewa. He is the person who is championing the immanence of monotheism in African thought. African reception. I agree with Sané that the best way to receive Nicaea and the Trinity is using translatability. Professor Cyril Orji intervened on Thursday about translatability. And translatability is that Christianity is translatable, which means Christianity respects every culture. And you make sense of Christianity in the light of various cultures. So now, I'm not going to read this quote. This is Sané justifying translatability. Hansen also agrees. He says there is a difference between Greek and Hebrew thought. And this difference between Greek and Hebrew thought, if you are going to receive the doctrine of the Trinity or Nicaea, for instance, you must not necessarily think like Greeks. That Old Testament Hebrew thought also used their own language, and that is the point. Now, most often attempts in accepting Nicaea, some people, like African theologians, Nyamiti, they coin ancestral Christology, and it is full of different viewpoints. If you read Nyamiti's citation here, I'll just read it and stop, and then I'll take questions. In view of the above considerations, one is authorized to conclude that God the Father is, analogically speaking, the ancestor and ancestress of his Son, and this latter is his true descendant. For indeed, all the attempts essential to the African conception of ancestor apply to the Father in his relationship to the Son, although, of course, in an infinitely higher and radically different manner, as the similarities and differences between the divine and human types of ancestor readily show. My point in citing this is that at times, because he relies so much on Greek thought, he is looking for corollaries in African thought in the light of Greek thought. What you end up doing is you fall into subordinationism. That is at least Nyamiti's thought on ancestral Christology. I'm not going to take a position on that. Let me conclude. My conclusion is that we just need to realize, following Lonergan, that there is a change. Lonergan emphasizes the new theology. There is a change now from logic to method, from posterior analytics to the modern notion of science, from human nature to human history, from soul to subject, and from first principles to transcendental method. Aristotle has been superseded. And because of that, therefore, if we are to understand Nicaea, I understand there is a difference between, again, going back to Simon, we must always distinguish between doctrines and theological doctrines. You have church doctrine, you have theological doctrine. Theological doctrine are reflections of theologians. They may never become church doctrine. Some of them may eventually become, but some may not. Let me stop here.
Thank you. You still have like 48 seconds, but we'll add that to the question time. So, yes,
I like your presentation a lot. I'm asking myself, in the context of translatability, can't what you have just done be the tool for unity of the churches? The fragmentation that occurred in the churches with regard to understanding of doctrines. Because the Coptic church was not Greek. At least it had its own worldview, its own cultural world ways of understanding and knowing, which we are now becoming aware of. That said, I'm always curious, does it matter whether the Son exists in substance with the Father or not? Or is it about how does this teaching speak to the community in living their lives? But do I have to say I assent to this statement before I appropriate its usefulness to my own cultural world?
Very good question, Dan. That is why I made the distinction. In functional specialization, the tasks of theology, systematic theology seeks to understand the doctrine of the church. You don't prune the doctrines of the church. You appropriate the doctrines of the church in variety of contexts. And that is what translatability does. You don't come up with your own doctrine unless the church takes the decision and accepts a particular theological doctrine, that's church doctrine. To answer your question, an informed Christian theologian, if you are a theologian, the starting point of theology is the doctrine of God and the economy of salvation. For far too long, Joseph as number one, I have thought as you did. But my research now and greater engagement with Lonergan makes me actually realize that the starting point of theology, every theologian must know the Christian doctrine of God. It is the starting point upon which you apply any other thing.
But can I follow up quickly? The economy of, as you talk about, and even the doctrine of the church, it's always interpreted doctrine. There is nothing like unmediated, uninterpreted doctrine. And in the interpretation of doctrine, the reception by the church of what God has done in the world is always done within a social, cultural, political world. And that is one aspect that I do feel strongly that the Western Church or the magisterium has tended to remove this particular aspect of the cultural realities defining how the church receives or understands God. God always encounters us within our social cultural context, never outside of it. So what is...
Yeah. So, I think you're already promoting something that's happening.
Simon, the reason why I wrote this, honestly, it is really important. Everything is not Western.
Exactly.
Everything is not the Western church taking over. No. These are the tasks of theology, and they agree with our mind. This is unrevisable.
Okay, my question is connecting the two talks. Is about Arius. When I say in general Arius, Constantine, if my interpretation is right, the calling of Nicaea was the recognition that he needed to unify the empire. So one God, one empire. And him sitting there, I think, was a statement saying, you have to get into this one God and one empire. Therefore, how synodal was that? So I don't know what you have to say on that.
The answer is simple. It is, if you are to engage yourself in functional specialty interpretation, context is important. What I introduced was the context. That context was, you are right, in terms of the intent of Constantine. He was not even baptized yet. You are right in the mention of the peace of the empire. But did he influence much? Not much. Had he the power to call that? Yes. Was he the only person who had the power at that material point in time? Yes. So the interpretation must be done properly. You just don't use modern contemporary viewpoint to interpret events that happen in a different period. And that is why when you are done, you must double check what you've done with history. And then what you've done will come up, what it will come up with is controversies. And these controversies, once you resolve the controversies, this one is general special categories. It applies to all disciplines. Unique, specific to theology is foundations, doctrine, systematics. What I see Simon doing in his papers, because I've attended his presentation, you do not distinguish between doctrines and systematics. When you don't, people will clap for you. But so let me stop here. Please, let's.
My name is coming up.
No.
Let me respond. I still insist, Joseph, as I've been telling you, the mind never exists in abstractum. The mind exists in a cultural world of meaning making. And so, when we talk about the foundations, the doctrines, or whatever, it is the church that is contextually grounded in a Judeo-Christian context and eventually in a Greco-Roman context.
Why did you give him another opportunity to continue the same thing?
That said, we believe in one God.
Now I'm missing, wait, I'm missing a question from Stephen.
Okay, sorry, we'll talk later.
Yes.
That's okay.
We have the final question.
A simple observation.
Yes.
The Council of Nicaea being convened by Constantine, not only from a doctrinal perspective, but also from provision. He is the provider. He is the one who can make all this, troubles and provisions that we have to understand. Also, coming 2,000 years, in 1888, in Ethiopia, there was a Christological controversy within the Orthodox Church. So, Emperor Johannes IV convinced the scholars of Ethiopia. Then they discussed it. At the end of the day, he sided with those who make sense, and he executed what has been decided. So this is not too remote to what the 4th century. It has happened about 100 years ago. So this is, but at the end of the day, is who has the purse is what matters.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good place to stop. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have another switch again. Yes. So, Josiah, Braptu will be speaking of the Geese Right Catholic tradition, faith and identity in North America. The Geese of the Geese Right Catholic Apostolate of North America. So, Brafty, you have the floor.
Thank you, and God bless you. And wake up. So, can I?
You should just be able to plug it in your laptop.
What is okay? Here.
Yeah.
Give me a couple of minutes of preparation. Don't take my
Go get some coffee if you need, but don't be long.
Okay. I can also put this one there.
Okay, yeah, they should.
I will send you a copy.
Okay, fine.
There they are.
No, go to the over here. Yeah, the one is from my page.
Okay, perfect. There you go. Did you
Okay.
need both of them up at the same time?
No.
No, okay.
No, what I do is, this is just the background.
Perfect.
So,
Let me get some more.
We'll have a steel cage match between Joseph and Simon afterwards.
Oh, no.